Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whenever you happen to see this video. We're continuing reading Bert Hellinger's book, A Philosophy of Love, A Philosophy of Being, Rising in Love, published by the Hellinger Sciencia in 2008. Only thanking. I am going to tell you a short story. There was once a person who felt indebted to God because he had been saved from a life-threatening situation. He wondered what he could do to show his gratitude. He asked a friend what he might do, and the friend imparted the following. A man loved a woman with all his heart and asked her to marry him. However, she refused him and seemed to have other plans. One day, as they were crossing the road, a car nearly ran the woman over, but the man, with utmost presence of mind, pulled her out of the way. After he saved her, she turned to him, looked into his eyes, and said, "Now I will marry you." The storyteller turned to his friend and asked, "How do you think the man felt?" Instead of answering, his friend only grimaced. "You see," said the storyteller, "perhaps God feels the same way about your kind of gratitude." Food for thought, right? How am I being thankful? From where is my gratitude coming out from? From where is my thanks coming out from? Homecoming. Here's another story with the same theme. A group of childhood friends went to war together, experienced indescribable dangers, and many of them died or suffered severe injuries. But two returned home unharmed. One of the men became very quiet. He knew that his salvation was not his achievement, and he took his life as a gift of grace. The other man boasted of his heroic deeds and the dangers he had escaped. It was as though his experience had been in vain. Happiness. Undeserved happiness is often experienced as something threatening that causes anxiety. This has to do with the idea that we secretly suspect that our happiness might tempt fate or elicit the envy of others. It seems that we experience happiness as if we are breaking a taboo, and so it is accompanied by guilt and a sense of anxiety. Gratitude reduces the anxiety. To accept happiness, we need humility as well as courage. Equilibrium. An exchange of guilt and innocence is set in motion by this interaction of giving and taking, and it is regulated by a need for balance that is felt by everyone. As soon as balance is achieved, a relationship can either end or it can, through renewed giving and taking, be rekindled and continue. There can be no such thing as continuous exchange unless equilibrium is reestablished in between. It is the same as when we are walking. We remain standing still if we insist on maintaining our present balance. But we fall down when we lose it completely. We can only move forward if we alternately risk our balance and then regain it. Guilt experienced as obligation and innocence as expectation act in the service of exchange. With this ongoing exchange, we nurture each other's development and connect positively. This kind of guilt and innocence is therefore a positive force. Through them, we experience order and a sense of control. We feel in harmony. Injury and loss. In giving and taking, guilt and innocence can also take on negative aspects. For example, if the taker is the perpetrator of a crime and the giver is the victim. This occurs when a person does something to someone else who is defenseless. When an individual claims something that causes pain to another, or when one assumes an advantage at the expense of another. Here too, the perpetrator and the victim are subjected to the need to reestablish equilibrium. The victim has a right to justice, and the perpetrator knows he is liable for redress. However, this type of exchange leads to further harm, for the victim wishes harm to the perpetrator, wanting him to suffer for what he did. For this reason, more is required than just compensation. The perpetrator has also to atone for the crime. Only when both victim and perpetrator have harmed each other, lost and suffered in the same measure, can they again feel equal. Only then is peace and reconciliation possible between them, and they can either again do each other good, or if the damage to each other is too great, agree to part peacefully. Here is an example. The way out. A man told his friend that his wife still held it against him even after 20 years, that just after their wedding, he had left her alone for 6 weeks to go on vacation with his parents. It seems they needed a driver, and he agreed to it. All of his apologies and pleas for forgiveness had achieved nothing. The friend told him it would be best to tell her that she may ask for or do something for herself that will cost you just as much as it cost her to be left alone 20 years ago. The man understood and beamed. Now he felt he had the key that could unlock the door. Some people may be concerned that reconciliation may only be possible if the innocent party also becomes selfish and claims retribution. However, as the old adage says, by your fruit shall you be known. We only need to look at the outcome to be able to judge what is really selfish and what actually serves to enhance balance. Helplessness. connection with damage and loss, we experience innocence in various ways. First, we know it by the name of helplessness. Often, only the perpetrator is able to act and the victim must suffer. We judge the guilt of the culprit by the degree of helplessness of the victim. The more helpless the victim, the greater the crime. However, after an evil deed has been committed, the victim need not remain helpless. She can demand justice and atonement from the culprit in order to put an end to the guilt and allow for a new beginning. If the victim will or cannot act, then others may do that for her, but with a significant difference. The revenge taken in the name of the victim will be more than if she had demanded justice and revenge on her own behalf. Here is another example. Double displacement. An older married couple participated in a personal growth workshop, but by the first evening, the wife was missing. She resurfaced the next morning and stood in front of her husband with the words, "I've spent the night with my lover." The woman seemed attentive and caring toward all the other group members. Only when she addressed her husband did she seem unhinged. The others couldn't make out why she was so angry with him, particularly as he didn't defend himself when confronted by her infidelity. Instead, he maintained his cool. In the course of the workshop, it emerged that as a child, the woman had been sent to the countryside by her father, together with her mother and her siblings. The father remained in town with his girlfriend. Sometimes he even visited his family with his girlfriend, and his wife served them both without reproach or complaint. She suppressed her rage and her pain, but her children sensed it. You could call this heroic virtue, but the effects are terrible. In human systems, a repressed grudge reappears later precisely in those who have no defense against it. It is mostly the children and grandchildren who take it on without being aware of it. In this way, a double shift emerges. First, there is a shift from the person who suffered onto another. In our example, the shift is from the mother to the daughter. Second, there is a shift to another object. Instead of holding the father responsible, the blame and revenge are transferred onto the innocent husband. This is easier because the husband does not put up any defense as he loves his wife. In such cases where the innocent would rather suffer than act, there will soon be many more victims and perpetrators. The solution in this case would have been for the mother to be openly angry with her husband. Then he would have been obliged to confront his own behavior, and it would have led either to a new beginning for the couple or a separation. It is important to note that in our example, the daughter not only loves her mother, on whose behalf she exacts revenge, but also her father, whose behavior toward her mother she imitates in her behavior toward her own husband. Here, another pattern of guilt-innocence comes into effect. The blind child's love also blinds her to the order of priority. This innocence makes us blind for the guilt of someone else, As a consequence, people have to become guilty towards others and feel innocent themselves. Double shifts also occur when a victim is not able to act because of her helplessness after she has been harmed. Here is an example of this. The avenger. In the course of his psychotherapy, a man in his 40s was preoccupied and anxious that he might become violent. His behavior and his character did not indicate that this was likely, and so the psychotherapist asked him if there had been any violence in his family. It emerged that his uncle, his mother's brother, was a murderer. In his company, he had had an employee who was also his lover. One day, he showed her a photo of another woman and asked her to have her hair styled in the same way as the woman in the photo. She obliged. After some time, the man traveled abroad with her and murdered her. Then he returned home with the woman in the photo, and she now became his employee and his mistress. The murder eventually came to light, and he was punished with a life sentence. The therapist wanted to know more about the client's relatives, particularly about his grandparents, the murderer's parents, as he was curious about the motivation for such an act. His client could give him little information. The grandmother was apparently a very pious and respected woman, and he knew nothing about his grandfather. But he inquired further and found out that his grandmother had reported her own husband's homosexuality to the Nazis, and as a result, he was arrested, sent to a concentration camp, and eventually killed. It was the pious, excuse me, grandmother who was the true murderer in this system. She was the source of the destructive energy. The son, the client's uncle, avenged his father like Hamlet. Here, the double displacement emerges again. First, the son took on the revenge in his father's place. That was the displacement in the subject. But he spared his mother, and instead of murdering her, he murdered the woman he loved. That was the displacement in the object. And in this, he identified with the father again, where the rage would have been directed at his wife. He bore the consequences not only for his own murderous deed, but also for that of his mother. Thus, he was loyal to both parents, to his mother by becoming a murderer, just like her, and to his father by suffering imprisonment. Further, he went to prison in her place, and thereby acted out his father's rage for him. His sentence, both literal and figurative, was enacted in several ways. I do this for you, mother, and I do this for you, father. It is therefore an illusion to believe that we can remain free from involvement with evil by maintaining the pretense of innocence and helplessness. Instead, we need to face up to the truth of offender's guilt, even if this means we do something bad as well. Otherwise, guilt cannot find an end. Passively submitting to someone else's guilt does not preserve one's innocence. This also causes harm. Passively submitting to someone else's guilt does not preserve one's innocence. This also causes harm. Thank you very much. The next reading, forgiveness on page 22, and so forth. Thank you very much. Good evening. Whenever you happen to see this video, good night. Thank you.